How did a man who died in 1945, with no internet, no satellites, no modern tools, describe the exact world we are living in right now in 2026 with such accuracy that it feels less like prophecy and more like a personal warning written for this very moment? Edgar Cayce did not speak in riddles, he did not use vague symbols, he spoke clearly about a time when East and West would stand at the edge of a conflict strong enough to break the foundations of the entire world order. He talked about leaders who would destroy old alliances. He talked about shifts inside the earth and inside human minds, so deep that humanity would face one single choice: wake up or be swept away. Read that again. Then look at the world around you. Right now, in 2026, a war in the Middle East will not stop. The situation between Israel and Iran has pulled the whole world's attention to a breaking point that almost nobody predicted even 10 years ago. The United States is actively breaking apart the alliance structures that held the Western world together for 80 years. And under all of this, under all the noise and headlines, millions of ordinary people around the world share the same quiet feeling. Something bigger is moving. Something is happening behind the curtain. Cayce had a name for this moment. He called it the Great Awakening of Consciousness, and he said it would not come softly. He said it would come with chaos, with deep uncertainty, and with a feeling shared by all of humanity, that the ground under civilization itself is shifting. Are you feeling that? Because if you are not here by accident. Before we continue, type in the comments right now. Did you find this video by accident, or did something guide you here? Your answer might surprise even yourself. We are going to go through the 6 predictions of Edgar Cayce that are coming true right now, one by one, with full context and depth. And we will ask the question that almost nobody dares to say out loud. What if everything happening right now has a purpose far beyond what we can currently understand? Stay until the 6th prediction, not because it will scare you, but because hidden inside it is something every person alive today needs to hear. Not fear, hope. A quiet, real, and extraordinary hope. Before we dive into the predictions, you need to understand who this man really was. Because if you don't know his story, these predictions might feel like simple curiosities, but they are much deeper than that. The year is 1901. In a small town in Kentucky, a young photographer named Edgar Cayce loses his voice. Doctors find no explanation. The paralysis of his vocal cords is complete, and nothing works. Desperate and out of options, Cayce decides to try something nobody around him had ever seen before. He lies down, closes his eyes, and enters a state of deep trance. Then something extraordinary happens. He begins to speak, with a clarity and detail that leaves everyone in the room completely speechless. He diagnosed his own illness, described the exact treatment needed, and when he woke up, his voice had returned. That single moment changed everything. Over the next 43 years, Cayce gave more than 14,000 psychic readings. They were called sleeping readings because he delivered them in a trance state, lying down, eyes closed, completely still. In this state, he spoke about illnesses, past lives, the hidden history of humanity, and the future. Doctors, scientists, and politicians traveled from all over the world just to sit before him. And what they received was not vague guesswork. It was specific, detailed information that simply should not have existed. He predicted the start and end of both world wars years before they happened. He described the Great Depression before a single sign of it appeared. He spoke of the creation of the State of Israel decades before it existed as a nation. He predicted the rise of China as a global power at a time when the entire world considered it nothing more than a sleeping giant. But here is something very few people know about Cayce. He did not consider himself special. He did not see himself as a guru or a prophet. In fact, many of his own readings deeply disturbed him. Sometimes he would wake up remembering absolutely nothing and would have to read his own transcripts as if they had been written by a complete stranger. He would say, "It is not I who speaks. I am only a channel." Cayce believed that this access to deeper information was not a gift given only to him. He believed every human being carries the ability to connect to something much larger, what he called the universal mind, or the Akashic records, a collective field where everything that has ever happened, and everything that could ever happen, is recorded and stored. Today, in 2026, this idea no longer sounds so strange. Quantum physics is beginning to touch concepts that directly echo what Cayce described: non-locality, quantum entanglement, and the idea of consciousness not as a product of the brain, but as a field that exists independently. The question is not whether Cayce was real. Thousands of his documented readings are archived and fully verifiable. The real question, the one that should be keeping you awake, is this: why do his visions speak so directly and so precisely to the exact moment we are all living through right now? Cayce spoke of cycles. He described a specific period in the early 21st century as the hinge moment, the turning point where humanity would face its defining choice and choose the path it would walk for generations to come. Now tell me in the comments on Marathon, do you believe some people can genuinely access information beyond what the human mind should be able to reach? Yes or no? Let's see what this audience really thinks. With that context in mind, let us talk about the first prediction. What Edgar Cayce saw about the world order is happening right in front of our eyes. In 1939, he said, "A time will come when the great powers of the West will lose the trust of the nations they once guided, and in that vacuum, new forces will arise that will reshape the map of human power." Today in 2026, you do not need to be a psychic to see this, but you do need to stop for just one moment and look at the full picture. Donald Trump has returned to the United States presidency, bringing with him a vision of the world that is radically different from the international order that has existed since 1945. That old order was built on alliances and shared institutions. Trump has directly challenged that foundation. NATO is under pressure it has never faced before. Relations between the United States and Europe are broken in ways that seemed impossible just a few years ago. Europe is now seriously talking about defending itself for the first time in decades. Countries that once looked to Washington for leadership are now making their own quiet calculations. China watches, Russia moves, and the global South negotiates its own future. Cayce spoke of a complete reconfiguration of power between North and South, between East and West, accompanied by a deep global feeling of disorientation. You are feeling that disorientation right now, and you are not alone. But Cayce said something that changes everything about how we should see this moment. He said this collapse of old orders is not a tragedy. It is a contraction before birth, the pain that comes just before something entirely new enters the world. Before we move to the second prediction, drop a comment right now. Do you believe the old world order is finished, or do you think it can still recover? This is important. Tell me below. Now this leads us directly to the second prediction, and this one is personal for millions of people alive today. Cayce spoke repeatedly about the Middle East, calling it the cradle of human consciousness. He believed the deepest keys to humanity's origins were buried in that land, but he also spoke of fire. He described a conflict in that region so intense, so far-reaching that it would pull powers from every corner of the world into its orbit. A conflict not simply over land, but over identity, survival, and the right to exist. Today, the tension between Israel and Iran has reached a point that simply defies easy description. Behind it, the United States is redrawing the entire map of alliances in real time, and Cayce had a striking interpretation of all of this. He insisted that these visible conflicts on the surface are nothing more than symptoms of an internal war that humanity has failed to resolve for centuries, the war between fear and love. He said clearly, "No lasting peace ever comes from force. It can only come from a genuine change in human consciousness." But here is what makes this prediction truly remarkable. The conflict in the Middle East is producing an unexpected side effect that Cayce actually foresaw. It is igniting an urgent and deep spiritual search in millions of ordinary people across the world. When people completely run out of answers in politics and economics, they naturally begin to look upward, towards something transcendent, something beyond what they can see and touch. Cayce saw this not as a sign of weakness or despair. He saw it as the moment when ordinary human beings, like coal under extreme and unbearable pressure, begin the slow and certain transformation into diamonds. Now, I want to ask you something directly. In the middle of everything happening in the world right now, have you personally started asking deeper questions about life, about your purpose, about what is really real? Because if you have, Cayce would say that is not a coincidence. Type your answer in the comments. You might be more connected to this moment than you realize. The third prediction takes us to the Earth itself, and this one is impossible to ignore. Cayce was one of the very first people to speak about what we now call climate change, but he approached it from a completely different angle. He did not see it as simply a scientific or political problem. He said the planet is a living being, and it responds directly to human consciousness. When humanity operates from a place of fear and greed, it produces real and measurable physical consequences on the Earth's geological and electromagnetic systems. Today in 2026, the data is no longer something anyone can dismiss. Extreme weather events and geological anomalies are happening with a frequency that has no historical comparison. But Cayce went even further than general climate warnings. He specifically spoke of a shift in the Earth's axis and significant changes in the poles. And while modern science has its own explanations for these things, the documented acceleration of the magnetic North Pole's movement is a verified scientific fact, one that mirrors Cayce's warnings with uncomfortable precision. Right now in the comments, have you personally noticed that weather, natural events, or the world around you feels different lately? Not politically, physically. Tell me what you have observed. This brings us to the fourth and fifth predictions, and these two are deeply connected. Cayce called it the rise of collective consciousness. He said that as humanity faces these mounting crises, political, environmental, spiritual, it will begin to recover abilities it long ago forgot. Intuition, healing through intention, the ability to perceive reality beyond the five senses. He was not speaking in poetic terms. He was describing a literal shift in how human beings access and process the world around them. Today, the evidence of this shift is everywhere. Interest in meditation, mindfulness, and the science of consciousness is at its highest point in recorded modern history. Researchers at some of the world's most respected institutions are now seriously studying phenomena like non-local cognition, the ability to know things beyond the reach of normal sensory experience. The HeartMath Institute has produced documented research showing that our emotional states do not stay inside our bodies. They actively affect the electromagnetic field of the Earth itself. Cayce saw all of this coming. Decades before the research existed, he described a humanity that would eventually stop outsourcing its understanding of reality to external authorities and begin discovering the truth from within. And now we arrive at the sixth prediction, the most important one, the one Cayce himself considered the foundation of everything else. He called it the transition to the age of Aquarius. Cayce said the last 2,000 years of human history were dominated by what he described as blind faith, a long era where external authorities, governments, and institutions held the power to define what people believed, how they lived, and what they were allowed to know. But the new era, he predicted, would be fundamentally different. He called it the age of direct knowledge, a time when individual human beings would reconnect with something divine without needing anyone to stand between them and that truth. And then he said something that should stop you completely. He specifically identified 2025 and 2026 as the peak transition years, the years of maximum tension between two opposing paths, the path of fear and control on one side, and the path of love and genuine cooperation on the other. Look at the world right now. Tell me that does not feel exactly right. But here is what matters most about Cayce's final message. It was not a message of doom. Before his death in 1945, after everything he had seen in his readings, all the wars, the suffering, the coming chaos, he left humanity with this. After its darkest trials, humanity would finally remember who it truly is. Not just physical bodies moving through a difficult world, but spiritual beings on a purposeful divine journey. The chaos we see today is not evidence that everything is falling apart. It is evidence that the old world is dying, making space, clearing the ground, so that something entirely new can be born. And here is the truth that changes everything about how you see your own life right now. You are not a spectator in this process. You never were. Every single time you choose compassion over judgment, every time you choose peace over fear, every time you refuse to let the noise of the world collapse you into anger or despair, you are actively tilting the balance of this planet. Your choices are not small. Multiplied by millions of souls making the same quiet, daily decisions, they are literally writing the future. So I leave you with one question, not for the comments, not for anyone else, just for the silence of your own heart. What are you choosing today? More fear or more consciousness? Because your answer, multiplied by millions of people just like you, is the only force powerful enough to determine what kind of world comes next. And if this video reached something real inside you, share it with one person who needs to hear it right now. Not to convince them of anything, just to remind them they are not alone in what they are feeling. That single act is already the answer to the question,